When I began in the restorative justice movement way back in the mid-1970s, there was no research whatsoever, and there were lots of questions. Yes, this seemed like a good program, good ideas, but many, many people were skeptical of, is there any indication that this has a real impact? Today, I am very confident in saying, after the 4 decades of the restorative justice movement, we have learned a great deal from practice and research from more than 90 studies, all involving different kind of comparison groups. In terms of practice, we've learned that having neutral and impartial facilitators and mediators of restorative justice dialogue in its many forms is extremely important. We've learned that providing thorough training for mediators and facilitators is very important, where they learn not just the skills up in their head, knowledge, but they learn actual practice, how to facilitate dialogue sessions. We've learned about the supreme importance of inviting crime victims to be involved in the process, not requiring them, but inviting them with respect if they want to get directly involved and speak with the person who harmed them. We've learned that preparation of the victim and offender is extremely important. Most programs, that preparation involves in-person, face-to-face preparation, meeting separately with the offender and then the victim, sometimes more than once, and then bringing them together. The preparation is supremely important, and the preparation also involves preparation of the facilitator and mediator themselves. So they not just prepare reviewing their notes, but they prepare in terms of being mindful of their own energy, their own ego, being able to slow down so they can be more comfortable with silence and allowing space for the victim and offender to talk with each other, to tell their stories. We've learned that the central part of effective restorative dialogue in its many forms is creating a safe place for dialogue, a place where people feel open enough, comfortable enough, respected enough, that they can tell their story, their perspective on what happened, how it impacted them. And related to that, we've learned the enormous healing process of storytelling. Not being focused on just getting settlements, fixing things, developing a reparation plan. Yeah, that's important at a later point, but first providing opportunities for the stories to come out without interruptions, without a lot of active listening and paraphrasing by the mediator, but learning to have a deeper sense of listening. Yes, active listening is important at times, but we've learned even more important is that deeper, heartfelt listening to the stories of others. We've learned that many programs, in fact, most programs over the decades, particularly in this country, have been operated and initiated by private nonprofit organizations and communities, working closely with the criminal justice system, with police departments, with prosecutors, with judges, but having community volunteers, not just paid justice system staff, but community volunteers being trained as the actual facilitators of dialogue or the mediators. We've learned that's extremely important. We've also learned that victim-offender mediation and other forms of restorative dialogue can work at any point in the criminal justice system or the juvenile justice system. A national survey we conducted a number of years ago found that the largest percentage of programs in this country operated at the pretrial diversion level with juveniles. Many programs also work at the point between adjudication but before sentencing or disposition. That's a smaller window of time. And many programs work after it's gone through the court process. It's part of the sentencing or disposition, and the actual dialogue or mediation doesn't occur until after that. We've also learned that it can work with individuals coming out of state institutions or local county institutions, years later even. We've also learned that through practice that restorative dialogue in its many forms can work in many other systems, such as school systems, workplaces, faith communities. In terms of specific research data, we've learned from the 90 different empirical studies in 7 different countries, we've learned consistent findings of high levels of victim satisfaction, offender satisfaction, perceptions of fairness, reduction in recidivism. Let me share with you 3 particularly studies, large studies. They're called meta-analyses. These are studies that pull together a variety of smaller studies blend the data, clean it up, and reanalyze it. The Canadian Department of Justice did one of these meta-analyses back in 2001. It involved 35 studies, primarily of victim offender mediation, a few family group conference studies as well. 26 of these studies focused on youth, 9 with adult. They found a positive impact on victim offender satisfaction with the process, perceptions of fairness. They found a greater sense of restitution completion, not a sense, but a reality, that restitution completion is more likely if the offender goes through a mediation or dialogue process than simply having a judge order the offender to pay restitution. And they found consistent reduction of recidivism. In 2003, I conducted a large meta-analysis with colleagues at the University of Tennessee. We had a total sample of 9,307 juvenile offenders, roughly half of whom went through the court process, the other half whom went through victim offender mediation. We found a 26% reduction in recidivism, criminal repeating. And we also found for those young offenders who did commit another crime, they committed less serious crimes. A third study, a meta-analysis I'd like to highlight, was conducted in 2007 by Larry Sherman and Heather Strang in England. And this focused on a variety of programs there. And they found there was far more evidence on restorative justice practices than there were for most innovations in criminal justice. And that's been my own experience as a researcher and a practitioner. There are more empirical studies to validate the core effectiveness of restorative justice dialogue, particularly victim offender mediation, family group conferencing, than there are for most programs in the criminal and juvenile justice system that have been supported and funded for year after year after year, many years. The program the research by Strang and Sherman also found, and this was a randomized controlled study, very rigorous study that found reduced recidivism for both violent and property offenders. And they found that when used in terms of a diversion program, it had significant reduced costs for the system. All of this is to say that there has been a consistent pattern of positive outcomes. I don't want to overhype this because all of the studies, including mine that I've done in this country and numerous other countries, have also found negative data. But the negative data tends to be in the 10% or less range, and tends to typically focus on things like there wasn't effective follow-up on the restitution or reparation agreement. You know, it was a good agreement. People felt good about the mediation or dialogue session. But then actually receiving it, it seemed to drop off the chart. Victims were concerned. There wasn't enough follow-up. Some of the studies, my earlier studies, found that people felt the mediator was too kind of rigid, tight. You know, some mediators were literally reading a script or, you know, had to flip a bunch of cards they were looking at. And what we've learned over the years is, yes, it's important for mediators to look over notes, you know, the night before, even the morning before the session. But it's equally or more important for the facilitator to be mindful of their own energy, their presence with the parties. Are they relaxed? Are they at peace? Are they able to slow down? Because the people you're working with will pick that up. And if the facilitator's nervous or overly concerned, are they doing it perfect or whatever, that can interrupt with the flow of the conversation. Not always in a bad way, but typically it will oftentimes interfere with it. Well, in conclusion, I'd like to point out, while there have been over 90 studies in 7 different countries, I don't want to communicate a sense that we have all the data that we need. No, we need more studies. We need more rigorous studies. But I am here to say that we have a good foundation in the restorative justice movement. Some people who have heard about restorative justice in just recent years, it's kind of new to them, they have the idea that this is some new thing out there, that there's obviously not much research. That's simply not the case. Restorative justice as a movement is in the global community at this point in history, with the United Nations endorsement, the European Union endorsement. Our studies have found that there are restorative justice policies and programs ranging from very modest initiatives to large efforts in every state in this country. and numerous other countries. I can't even count the countries at this point. United Nations has put a lot of focus on this and has put out their own guidelines. In recent years, the United Nations Program Development Committee has worked with me and other colleagues in the international community, bringing this and working with folks in Turkey and with the Turkish Ministry of Justice. So restorative justice is out there. There's plenty of evidence to show that it's having a positive impact, working together with our existing criminal and juvenile justice systems. Restorative justice will not work with all cases, but there's clear evidence it can work with many, if not most cases, ranging from the most minor cases, such as shoplifting or vandalism or theft, to the most serious cases, including murder, attempted murder, sexual assault. And I want to be very clear on one point. This is extremely important. The thousands of cases that go into restorative justice programs in this country and other countries, many thousands of cases, over 90%, probably over 95%, are property offenses and minor assaults. But there's a small but growing number of cases that represent very serious and violent crimes such as homicide, attempted homicide, multiple homicide, sexual assault. When I was asked to work with victims of those severely violent cases as a practitioner way back in the 1980s, I was one of 2 or 3 people that were asked to work with people who were seeking healing in their own lives, and part of their healing, they wanted to meet the man or woman in prison that caused all of that terror. In those early years, there was not a single legal jurisdiction in the world, not just in our country, that allowed that kind of process. We had to work it out individually with individual wardens or commission of corrections to get access into the prison. Today, there are more than 27 states in our country, many other countries throughout the world that are opening this process up. And I predict that we'll be seeing far more states in our own country and other countries setting up administrative protocol to allow any victim of crime, of the most serious violent crime, the opportunity to meet the prisoner, if the prisoner is willing, because it's always voluntary, and after lengthy preparation, the process of coming together. And the research I conducted on this, representing the first 2 states in America, Texas and Ohio, that opened up this process, found very positive outcomes in those very serious and violent cases. All of which, again, is to say, restorative justice is a promising practice in the coming years and decades. Yes, we have to be humble on the one sense and realize it's not for all cases, yet on the other hand, we have to take a position of recognizing there is clear empirical evidence. This can have a positive impact on not just the human impact in promoting healing, but also the systemic impact of reduced cost and better use of our resources in our many communities.